I urge you, brothers and sisters, do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may discern the will of God, what is good, what is pleasing to Him above all. The transformation of our mind. How has your mind, your perspective, been transformed throughout your life? How have you seen your progress and your growth? I hope that you could look back into your life and realize very pivotal moments of insight, that God gave you an occasion, a conversation, or perhaps appropriately today, some amount of suffering that radically changed your perspective and worldview, allowing your mind to conceive of the higher things of life and to strive for those higher things above all. The responsorial psalm today sung so beautifully. In fact, I'm curious to find out if you remember how it was sung. And Gracie, you cannot help them. And I want you to sing it in 1, 2, 3, 4, and okay, so we heard a little bit of the resonance of what that melody was. It started to emerge, growing a little bit of confidence. Now we heard it. Now with more confidence together we sing 1, 2, 3, and Gracie, do you give them a passing mark? Very good, very good. My soul is thirsting for you, my God. What is the premise of that? That there is a suffering of want, that there is a thirst, there is something lacking. Therefore, recognizing something within is a perspective shift. If I look to the world in order for my thirst to be quenched, and it never is being quenched, at what point will I start to evaluate this world and say that the world cannot quench my thirst, period? I believe that there is no spring in this world that will quench my thirst. Therefore, my soul is thirsting for you, my God. When do we start to develop this sense of a perspective shift and our mind moves from all of the things we are pursuing in the world to satiate us, to make us feel loved, to make us feel a sense of, I'm okay? When do we shift from that, because it really doesn't reach down to the very core of that level of thirst or ache, as the scriptures say, and begin to conceive something higher? What do we, or who do we encounter along the way that would shift our perspective and help us root our desire more appropriately in higher things? Well, for me personally, and perhaps for you, the transformation of your mind and my mind came from Christ. For me, this was truly what happened. When I came to encounter the true love of Jesus Christ, it changed everything. To realize that God's love wanted to be involved in my day-to-day, in my minutia. That God's love wanted to meet me in my sinfulness, in my brokenness, in the things I would have desired to keep hidden away. That God's love even wanted to be there. That God's love wanted to be in the place where I was imprisoned, or lame, or deafened. In all of the respects of my infirmities, God met me along the way. And encountering His love and the level at which He was willing to love radically transformed everything for me. So much so that it made me want to give my whole life in service of Jesus Christ and the name of God. To choose celibacy. to choose priesthood. Celibacy meaning a total gift of self. Not marrying anybody, not forming a family. Being a part of all families, but at the same time being a part of none. And in that mystery, discovering, wow, Jesus' priesthood, his masculinity, his celibacy was exercised in the same way. I'm feeling called in intimacy to union with Christ's masculinity, Christ's celibacy even. Now, there are many obstacles, as you could imagine, that one would experience in this journey. And perhaps you've experienced obstacles to your perspective shifts and how you're trying to live out your life or living up to an ideal of what's presented in the message of Jesus Christ. I'll never forget, I was actually on the eve of my diaconate ordination a number of years back in South Florida. And my father and my cousin came down from New York. And my dad was throwing out a line at my buddy's house with two of my best friends, who one of them was a priest, one of them was a couple of years younger than me. And as they're throwing out lines into the water to pull fish from that beautiful lake in Delray, my buddy Josh, who's now the vocations director from Orlando, turned to my dad and he said, "So how do you feel about, your son, not getting married and, going to be a priest, going to kind of give his life, in that way?" And he's sitting there with the line in the water and he says, "Yeah, I'm still kind of hoping that he'll, possibly meet somebody and maybe get married and, have experience the joy of being, being a father and having kids." Which I thought was humorous because he divorced my mother and moved on with his life. But that's beside the point. That's beside the point. But that's what he said, right? So this is what he said. And I'm on the eve of my diaconate ordination. So he's like, "I'm going to give it another year." Right? I give it another year. To which my buddy Josh, who is as matter of fact can be, you would love him or hate him, either way, but you love him. I love him. Josh turns to him and he says, "You realize that, your son is giving that up tomorrow." He's like embracing this life tomorrow. He's like, "Oh, really?" From the experience of encountering Jesus in the sublime gift of self, how could you not be inspired to give more? When you have examples of incredibly holy men and women, or you watch a movie of one of the saints, how do you not get inspired to say, maybe I could live out that way? Maybe I could be better. Maybe I could live virtuously. Maybe I could commit myself to that. That's great. I remember being at Ave Maria University, great Catholic university. Not only named Catholic university, actually is a Catholic university. Highly recommend you sending your kids there, or encouraging them at least. A greater majority of us had encountered Christ. The transformation of mind already shifted. We were so in love with the Lord, many of us were discerning lives as priests or religious sisters. To be in that cultural context at that time in university's history was an amazing experience. Because all of the conversations around the table at lunch or breakfast or dinner revolved around giving more to Christ, to glorify him. I recall a number of times, talking about martyrdom. How amazing would it be to have the opportunity to give of your life and die for Christ? What a powerful testament. And we would sit there and we would imagine these very heroic ways of giving our lives to Christ. In those early years of formation, after falling in love with Jesus Christ, we could think of the most noble way to serve and sacrifice. We could imagine and fantasize, I'm going to be a priest like this, or I'm going to be a religious sister like this. until you begin living out the vocation and you begin suffering. And then you can't even get over one complaint. And you carry it in your heart for weeks. I met with a university sister of mine. We graduated right around the same time. And we were in a little spiritual direction session. And she said, wow, if you would have told me marriage would have called me to this type of thing, you know? When we were early in the years talking about sacrifice, the type of family I'm going to raise, and this is how we're going to do it. I would have really, I'd love to go back and say, hey, you don't know what you're talking about. You know? Because we could be filled with ideals. But where the rubber meets the road is our own human sinfulness. Where the rubber meets the road is our own limitations and the way God will manifest our death of self in our marriages, in the priesthood, in the religious life, in the single consecrated life. God will manifest opportunities for you to die to yourself. And the question is whether you will choose to die to yourself or not. Jesus says, come to me. Look at me. I'm on the cross. I've embraced my cross. Look, come to me. I'll teach you. I will teach you. I will guide you. Deny yourself. Whoever comes after me must deny himself. Take up his cross and follow me. Whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What's placed before us, my brothers and sisters, is this option to choose to lose one's life in relationship to God, dying to oneself, and embracing the cross of our lives. Now, I wonder if the prophet Jeremiah hung out in the school of all these other prophets, and they were like, hey, when we become big prophets, we're going to be prophets like this, right? And they came up with all of these concepts from the sacred traditions of Judaism. And they spent time in the temple meditating and praying over the sacred offerings and the sacrifices. They meditated upon the Torah, the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. And they reflected how to administer to the children of Israel. And they came up with all of these wonderful plans until the rubber met the road. Today, Jeremiah is the prophet that we're reflecting on. And Jeremiah himself was charged by God to be the prophetic voice to the children of Israel who were about to lose their identity because of the chaos of their whole culture. And their entire practice was being led to a life of dissipation and violence. This is prior to the Babylonian Empire coming in and leading the children of Israel into exile. This is where the children of Israel lose the gift of their promise because of the way they were living their lives. Jeremiah was probably not prepared to confront everybody, to say, hey, you're doing things terribly. You're wrong. The way you're living your life is unjust and offense to God. How do you warm up to that? How do you warm up that you are living in this world in an ungodly way? Would you be like, hey, give me more? Give me more. What you commit your mind to is evil and will never bear life. Would you be like, give me more, give me more? The way you are living out your passions in your flesh will cause destruction. Give me more. Give me more. Well, if you find yourself sitting there like if I was confronted that way, one-on-one, it would be hard for me to hear. That's probably the truth. If you're sitting there saying, give me more, excellent, stay there. The more that we can immerse ourselves in truth, the more our perspective will shift, and we will begin to live on this earth with our mind centered on heaven. And we will be quick to embrace our cross and to deny ourselves in every state in life. And what can come from the cross is new life. What can come from our own personal suffering is bearing the fruits of what God wants to bring into this world by your voluntary embrace of His will and the science of the cross. We hear of Peter being an obstacle to Jesus on the way. Who are your obstacles in your life? Who are the obstacles in your life who say, you don't have to go through marriage prep like that. Go through all those meetings with these priests. They don't get married. What do they know about marriage or commitment? Oh, girlfriend, you don't have to suffer that. Leave him and take his money. You laugh, but it's true. How many people are obstacles in your marriage? Oh, brother, just have another root beer, man. Get over it. How many obstacles are presented before you, even in your own family? My dad was an obstacle. I don't think he meant it. I don't think him as a villain. I don't think Peter was a villain either. I don't think he meant it. It's just with worldly minds, we don't want to suffer. But with eyes fixed on Christ, we can say, hey, the heavenly perspective is that suffering can bear something good. Suffering can bear something amazing and divine. My brothers and sisters, is the church worthy to suffer for? Is the message that we receive worthy to suffer for? Are your marriages worth it? Is your marriages worthy to suffer for? Your children? Is your country worthy to suffer for? Suffering for equal rights for all, that all men and women of all races are due equal opportunity. That their dignity is equal before God. Are we willing to suffer for that? What are you willing to suffer for? Hopefully, you're willing to suffer for something transcendent, something beyond yourself, something so noble that would be saintly. It would be an absolute act of righteousness before God and man, that you would be so willing to give of your life to that extent. I hope you consider suffering to that extent. More than a football game, more than a basketball game. Oh, and trust me, when I was growing up, I would suffer for my people on the field or on the court. For what? Broken knees and arthritis by the time I was 20? We suffer so quickly for money. We suffer so quickly for gain. We suffer so quickly for wants of our flesh. but we don't want to suffer for the noble things of life. Jesus sanctifies our suffering. Jesus provides us a cross to be the very catalyst in this world and the crosshairs to show us the path in front of us to heaven. Will you look and gaze through the cross of Jesus Christ at your own cross? And will you draw strength from Jesus Christ today in order for you to live fruitfully from your cross with hope? A hope that endures, a hope that will be established so securely in you that no matter what you are suffering today, you could say, I know beyond the shadow of a doubt, God is going to get me through this. I know through a shadow of a doubt that God is going to provide for me. You know, I reflected with my sister from Ave Maria University and we laughed. I said, you didn't envision marriage being like this. I didn't envision priesthood being like this. But this is the cross. And I trust that God is going to reinforce our efforts and give us strength. So let's pray together. And I'll never forget that prayer to the day that I die. This happened a while ago. And I still feel strength from that prayer. Because I was very honest. She was very honest. And before God, our vocation was being lived out and is still being lived out. May God protect our vocation, and may God protect yours. Jeremiah chapter 20, listen to this. You duped me, O Lord, and let myself be duped. I love this scripture. You duped me. You know what that means, right, young people? It's like you fooled me, right? You fooled me, God. I thought dying to myself was going to be like the movie I watched from St. John Bosco or whatever it is, St. Philip Neri. You duped me, oh God. You got me into this. I say that to Father Tetlow. Whenever I'm disgruntled or unhappy, I'm always like, man, you got me into this. All the day long, I am an object of laughter, and everyone mocks me. Do you think he was prepared for that? Do you think he had that in his mind at the very early ages of Prophet School 101? My brothers and sisters, before God, we will continually grow. Our perspective will shift. Our minds will transform, and that will happen to the day that we die. If you're sitting out there thinking that you got it all figured out, you don't. Get over that. If you figured out the solutions to the problems of the world and the poverty in which we face and the violence on every side, and your solution would fix everything, it won't. Jesus says the poor will always be among you. The poverty he's speaking of is the poverty of our humanity. Let me be very clear. Your pastor, Father Rich Pagano, is perfect. Perfectly sinful in every perfect way. And I come into this church, and I long to be in this church with you to turn our eyes to Jesus Christ. I long for the moments to be together with you, that we could open up our hearts and our minds to the Scriptures and receive the Holy Eucharist so that we may be fed by Jesus' body, his blood, his soul, his divinity, and to be instructed in the teachings that provide life and help us overcome the turmoil of today to the greater aspects of what is awaiting us in heaven for those who believe. I long for these moments to be with you as sinful people, asking God for his mercy and to help us grow. Each of us before God must grow. Each of us before God must embrace our cross and love from the cross and overcome the obstacles of the people in our life that get in the way of living out this vocation before God. for our marriages, for our country, for society itself, and for the providence of the future that we leave to our children and grandchildren. I beg you, embrace your cross today. Embrace the suffering of today. And you will embrace Christ, who will make all this evil, all of this suffering, turn to joy. And that joy will be seen by the next generation. That's why I'm very grateful I had my grandparents in my life. And I'm very grateful that my dad could be an obstacle here or there. I love him even more for it. Embrace of the cross is embrace of Christ. Let us be transformed in our minds of how we look at our personal suffering. And let us look at it with joy and anticipation of what God will provide through it.